good evening and welcome to the first episode of Temporalia House Children's Fireside Storytime. Now, when I was little, we didn't have it. My grandmother didn't have TV, and she only had a battery-powered radio, so we didn't watch TV late at night, and we didn't listen to the radio all day long. When it was time for us to have entertainment, we entertained each other. My grandmother would read to us, and sometimes we played music together. She played the piano, and I played a few instruments, and we all sang. And but in the evenings, she would read to us. She would read to me and my cousins, and she would read a lot of the same books that she read to her kids when they were little. And this is one of those books. Tonight's story, since it's Easter Sunday, since we're on Easter Sunday now, this is a good Easter book, and it teaches some good morals that a lot of stories these days don't teach these kind of morals this way. And this book has some complex themes, but in such a way that's easy for kids to understand. So this is the very same edition that my grandmother read from me, and this is Beatrix Potter's The Tale of Peter Rabbit. And this is the 1907 Henry Altemus Illustrated Edition. And this book is a very, very rare copy. This is a very rare edition of this book. Very hard to find, and they're usually quite expensive if they're in good condition. This book was considered so culturally important by the U.S. National Library of Archives that they chose this edition to be the immortalized edition of this book for their archives. And you can download a free PDF copy of this book from the link below. And I recommend that if you can't find an affordable copy of this, original copy of this book, then I recommend that you print this book out and keep it on hand. And every now and again, pull it back out and reinforce these values. So this is the 1907 original Henry Altemus Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter, and the illustrations in this book are just magical, just magical. This is the height of Art Nouveau beauty. I am just in love with this book, and I always have been. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. Now, they lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along, and don't get into mischief. I must go out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella, and she went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, they went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden. And he squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some cabbages or radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. Parsley helps your sick stomach. If you're sick to the stomach, eat some parsley. But around the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and he ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Now, Peter gave himself up for lost, and he shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Now, Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. My grandmother used to say he was naked as a jaybird then. He rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath the flower pot, and he began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. And presently Peter sneezed. Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. And Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him, and Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was sitting staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, 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 scratch. And Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. And Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. And Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Brand new shoes and jacket. Now, Peter never stopped running or looked behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was very busy cooking, and she wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. A fortnight is 2 weeks. Now, I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 teaspoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, well, they had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end. So the moral of this story is your parents know better. And you should always listen to your parents when they tell you not to go somewhere because it's not safe. They've been around the block a few more times than you have, and they know where the safe places are and where they're not. And when your parents tell you not to go somewhere because it's not safe, you're going to want to go there. Of course you are. I did when I was your age. Of course I did. And I made some pretty bad mistakes doing that when I was your age too. And I paid some very dear prices as a child. And I learned that lesson, to listen to my grandmother when she told me not to go over to that house down the road because they were weirdos. Well, yeah, they were weirdos. And I made a mistake, and I learned my lesson. So I'm hoping that y'all won't have to learn the same lesson that I did. So listen to your parents when they tell you not to go somewhere because it's not safe. Always listen to your parents because they love you and they just want you to grow up big and strong and beautiful. And if you go somewhere that's not safe, well, at the very least, you may end up with no jacket and no shoes. And at the worst, you might end up getting baked into a pie. So join me next month for another episode of Temporalia House Children's Fireside Storytime, where we will read another antique children's book that teaches good values and good morals from the old world to the new. I'm very glad that I was able to share this old family tradition that's gone through 4 generations of my family. This book has been read now by 4 generations of my family to children. And I'm very proud to be the 4th generation to be able to share this book with you. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful evening and a wonderful night's sleep. Happy Easter!